just seeing if this is all working.
So is this streaming live to a platform now, is it?
Yeah, it should be. One of them's connecting. Hi everyone. We'll just wait. Bear with us for a minute. Yeah, we're live. We're live on YouTube. So if anyone's there, just give us a shout. This is welcome to the Project Flux podcast, and this is the weekly pulse. So as we spoke about last week, we've now split the podcast into two. We've got um, the interviews that we have every Friday, and then on Tuesdays we're going to do the weekly pulse. But we're also going to make another change this week. We're going to start live streaming. So every Monday we will at about 7 o'clock, 7:15, we're going to do a live stream of the weekly pulse, which will then be made available for people to watch or listen to as normal on the Wednesday morning. So that's the new structure thing. So if anyone's tuning in now on either where are we streaming live, Yoshi? We're on YouTube, we're on LinkedIn, and we're on Twitch at the moment. So if anyone's about, we're trying to find our feet with this. So please just give us a little like or a thank you or a little comment in the live stream. We'll be really, really grateful, just so that we know that it's all working properly. In fact, I can see the YouTube live stream working, but I can't see how the LinkedIn one works. So we have to just assume that it is working one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So, Yoshi, how are you?
I'm awesome, mate. How are you?
Good, good. I'm really excited. I think it's been a great week, and it's also been a week of a little bit of consolidation for a change. I mean, there's still been some big announcements in the AI world, but we'll go through them all. But in some ways, it's been slightly more manageable, if you know what I mean, to try and understand what we're doing with AI. So we've got quite a few stories to run through. So the newsletter is going to be published tomorrow morning. And then on Friday, as we said, we'll have an interview with one of our special guests. But in terms of the big news this week, I guess we kind of hinted at it last week, but the big news really is that GPT 4.5 has been released to people on the pro license, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is
Yeah,
it just people on the pro license? So you need to spend about $200 a month to get it, but that's only a matter of time before it gets made available to everyone else. So we'll talk about our views on it in a minute, but before we get to that, I'll just what's your thinking with this? It's obviously a stopgap to 5 because hence it's called 4.5. But have they? There's a lot of people saying maybe they rushed this out because of all the work that's going on with their competitors. They're missing a trick and they've rushed something out a little bit half baked. Let's say it hasn't exactly set the world alight.
Yeah, so we didn't want to seem flat-footed, Sam Altman, right? It's the last of the non-reasoning models. It is good at a few things, so more general language tasks. Anything that requires reasoning, it probably shouldn't be used for. Um, the main things about it, though, is that it doesn't. It's less likely to hallucinate. It's supposed to be quicker. I know people saying that people are noting saying that it is slow at times, but it's supposed
Mm,
to be quicker. So I guess it's good for things like reporting, right? Or or retrieval augmented generation, so RAG and pulling information from your databases. It's good for that sort of stuff. But the way that
yeah,
I would describe it is kind of a grounding model. So
yeah,
it's not one that's going to fly, and hit space, but it's one that can fill in the gaps and solve a few pain points that people are having, like hallucinations. So if you're a business, you don't want your models to hallucinate. You want your outputs to be more reliable and consistent. So it should be doing that.
yeah. So I think it's. I mean, the interesting thing is they also say it's the last non-reasoning model.
Yeah.
So that it's not setting any benchmarks alight as such, is it? That's the other thing to be aware of.
Yeah. So the thing that I found interesting was that people were saying that with Sam Altman, because he was from Y Combinator, so he is used to having rapid growth and then fast exits. OpenAI are now in a position whereby they are a huge company and they've got a lot of eyes on them,
Yeah,
and people don't believe that he actually understands, or he's kind of out of his comfort zone in taking them to where they want to be. That's why when you use ChatGPT, it feels a bit scattergun. There's different models and all these different things and how to use them, and there were glitches and there were bugs, and even today there's still bugs, right? When you try and get a
yeah,
response and it gives you two versions, sometimes they're the same, or sometimes it doesn't even appear. You got to refresh it, and that's kind of why they're alluding to GPT-5 being this kind of mixtured hybrid approach where for the user, you don't really have to choose a model. It will just be you prompting the tool itself in ChatGPT. And in the back end, I guess some form of agentic workflow will decide which model is the one that's going to give you the output depending on what
Yeah.
you want.
Yeah. So this is very much a stopgap, isn't it? So when's your prediction about when 5 might come out?
I still think we're a few months away, but the problem is, like you said, if competitors release things earlier, and they probably won't now that they've all played their hands, kind of, with 3.7, Claude 3.7, and Grok 3, I think the speed. I don't think there's that much pressure at the moment. One thing I would say that this is the evolution now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we're moving into a world where people will just typically be using reasoning models, but they are now consistent. They are slower. So you have a trade-off, right? So it's, do you want more of your systems to kind of deliberate, slow reasoning models, or do you want this quick response in GPT-4 or Google Flash or some of these other models? And we'll kind of touch on this on Claude 3.7 because they've got this hybrid, haven't they? They've got this mixed bit where you can kind of choose that balance.
Yeah, we're going to come on to that in a minute. I think this kind of dichotomy between all the different models is going to be a thing of the past pretty soon with all of the different users. And it stands to reason, doesn't it, that as artificial intelligence, it should be able to determine what model it uses is best. And I think we'll get there, and we'll look back at this era of having to choose which model's appropriate as something quite quaint in the future.
Yeah,
I don't know what people think, but I certainly think that that's where it's going to go.
yeah,
But it's I have had some good feedback about it sounding and feeling just a lot more human and feeling like a lot more um, contextual, I suppose. It doesn't easily sort of display itself as an AI, but overall, I think sort of mixed reviews is the best way of putting it. And at $200 a month, I mean, I haven't spent the $200 a month. I won't really get a chance to play around with it properly until it goes to plus users, which will only be a matter of time, I imagine.
yes. They did mention empathy. So they've mentioned
Yeah,
that it should empathize more, so it should be more human-like. But do you
yeah,
recall a few weeks back when they said they removed the political impartiality, like that
yeah.
things won't be as impartial as they used to be? So they are making it more human-like. If you look at all these different elements, I think it's because, and this is the thing, it's all because of adoption, right? So there's this defensibility problem right now in AI where it's hard to defend your product
Yeah.
because there's no moat. As soon as you have a moat, it quickly fills in because there are new products coming out, there are new technologies coming out, there are new approaches coming out. So how do you really defend your product? There's different ways of doing
Good
that,
point.
right? So you have one which is embedding your AI into different solutions, into your ecosystem. So this is what Apple are trying to do with OpenAI and just what Microsoft have done and Google have done, and they're doing it quite well. And then there's brand,
Hmm.
and that's something which Anthropic do well. Google have kind of recovered, and OpenAI are kind of ruining in a sense because they've shifted so far from their open philosophy, the not-for-profit philosophy. And then there's the idea of network effects, and this is the bit I found really interesting because network effect relies on all of those things kind of playing together. And how do you then build uh, or have people adopting your technology, but also the retention element? And I don't know if that's network effects has always been around. It's always been a very powerful driver, but I don't know how well it will work in this game now that things are changing so quickly. And it's one to
Yeah.
look out for.
Well, I think what we definitely know is this isn't going to be the end of the evolution of these models, and we have to just keep our eye and ear to the ground. You can keep your eye to the ground. No, it's your ear to the ground, isn't it?
But what do you
That's
do, James? If because there are so many models, and I've just removed my Perplexity subscription for like the second time in a month, right?
yeah, yeah.
Because deep research was better. What is it that keeps you stuck to a certain provider?
I'm not really. I mean, my go-to one is ChatGPT, and the reasons for that is just the fact that I've probably used it more than any of the others, so it knows me better, and its memory feature.
Mm,
I don't have a subscription currently to Claude, but I will use it when I'm after something very articulate. Um, but I try and mix and match the different models. So I use Grok now. Like for instance, I was searching for a meme right the other day for the newsletter, and that's the best place to say what's the best AI related meme from the last week, because it is right up to date, because that's where people post their memes. So it's about figuring out which one's best for your needs, and then it's the combination of different models. So I was having a discussion with somebody earlier today about the fact that you could use Notebook LM is amazing at sort of going through a lot of documentation, a
Yeah.
lot of source data, and finding trends and surfacing insights from it. But then it only gives you some kind of a text-based note. So then you can take that and you could put that into ChatGPT with a deep research feature, and then turn that into a paper. So there's no, apart from the fact that I just always start with ChatGPT because I pay for it, and it's knows
Familiar.
me better than the others. I try and work out what's going to be best for the particular job at hand, like coding, right? So we'll come on to it in a minute when we talk about, Replit and Cursor and things like that. It's Claude 3.7 and Grok 3 are probably better at coding than any of the others at the moment. So if you just want to generate some really, really good code, in fact, let's turn to that now then, because one of the other big stories was around Google releasing their free AI coding assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because Google they do tend to kind of follow um, the competition, and these coding assistants aren't anything new, and I've been a big proponent of Replit. So Replit is a natural language coding platform where you can literally tell it what you want it to produce, and it will produce it for you. But what you can also do is you can work it in conjunction with some of these models. So you could go to, for instance, Grok or ChatGPT and ask it for some code. You can say, produce me, like the one I did before, produce me a construction risk register management tool. And you can say what you want, how you want it to look like, what you want it to do, and it will provide the code. You can then cut and paste that into Replit. You don't need to have any coding experience at all, and boom, it will start showing you what this app looks like, and then you can start talking to it through Replit. Now, the Google's got a version of that now, so effectively anyone can be a developer. And what this means for people in projects is that you're going to be able to, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I had that piece of software, or I wish there was somebody to develop this piece of software for me, or there's something out there but it's too expensive for what I want it for, you can just create one yourself. Like literally, I just said I've produced a risk management software in about 25 minutes before, just as an example.
But can you speak to that a bit more, because I haven't done it yet, and there is an
Yeah.
element that you think, oh, is there a bit of a learning curve here that I have to go through? But when you've spoken through some of the things that you've developed, it's almost been instant.
Yeah. So I guess it helps if you understand coding to some degree. So we're both lucky enough to have done the data analyst qualification. So we're familiar with what Python code looks like, even though we're probably not very good at it. We know what it looks like. So that definitely helps. But it's not a prerequisite. You can just talk to it because you're not actually doing any of the coding. The assistant is doing the coding for you. But what I would suggest to anyone who's in this area is interested is like go and do a very quick like Python course first. You can get one online. There's loads on YouTube, just so you're familiar with what's happening and what it means when it says it's downloading a package or a library. They've got these different Python libraries. But the other thing I did, which I thought was really cool, right? So I'm a child of the 80s, and in the 80s we used to have this computer called the ZX Spectrum. Did you ever hear that? You're probably too young for that. But there was a computer called the ZX Spectrum, and in the old days, what they used to do is you used to buy a magazine, and in the magazine was code for a game, and you literally had to manually type it in, and it would produce the game for you to play, and then you could save it to a cassette tape. So I went to some of these. This is how sad I am, but I went to some of these because they're all archived now online. I found one of them. I literally snipped the code. I put it into Grok, and I said, can you convert this to Python code? It did. Put it into Replit, and I had the game.
Wow, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it? And then I was able to make it better. So I said, well, now make it color, because it was in black and white, and things like that. But
so it's not really the skill of coding. It's your ability to think through steps logically. is
Well,
what takes you forward.
it's basically like ChatGPT. So if you're not a PhD person, or, somebody who struggles to write for whatever, you can now use ChatGPT to get your thoughts into something that's legible, right? So it's opened up a whole game for people who maybe weren't brilliant at writing or creativity. It's exactly the same with coding. So if you've got an idea, all these things are idea. They're idea kind of producers. So the fact that humans can still have the creativity to think of these things, and it usually comes from some pain point, right? Oh, wouldn't it be great if I could do this? Well,
Mm.
now it doesn't matter what it is. If you've got an idea and you want like some written text, you use ChatGPT. If you've got an idea and you want some picture, you can use Midjourney. If you've got an idea and you want some like a little video snippet, use Sora. And now, if you've got an idea and you want some software, use Replit or Cursor
Yeah.
or this new Google one. The point is that we need to make to people is that the sky's the limit now, right? And you don't there are no kind of restrictions to what you can do.
The
You
sky's the
don't
limit.
need
Sorry
to,
to
the
interrupt.
sky's the limit. You don't need to have spent 3 years at university learning how to code anymore. Yeah, sure, you probably need to upskill yourself a little bit. Like you say, it's probably you need to do a little bit of homework, but it's kind of what you could do in over a weekend now.
Makes you more productive. I saw
Much
someone
more.
do it with Notion today. So we've been speaking about Notion, and there was
I
a
love
guy
Notion.
who programmed. He built Notion in, I think it was 8 days, and then the guy who one of the developers who built Notion said someone built this in a few days, which took me 8 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Obviously, you
this
have
is
the
it.
inspiration to work from, but it's worth going back to the conversation though, because we do say that Google follow trend every now and then, but what they do well is they release things for free, and they have got this in this memory glitch and context where they can absorb so much information and retain it. I don't know how, but the perfect situation would be if all these companies just work together. You take a bit from each of them, you'd have the perfect tool.
Yeah. Well, you have to do that yourself, unfortunately, at the moment, and that's why listening to Project Flux and reading the newsletter helps you do that, because you just pick out the bits that are relevant to you. You don't need to act on every single bit of advice or information we give you. Take the bits that are relevant to you. So if you're somebody who's got a remote interest in coding and you've thought to yourself, oh, I wish I could produce a little app that does this risk register for me in a certain way. Well, you don't need to say that anymore. You can just do it. Just go and do it. Just play with it. It's just amazing. It really is. So, and with that, of course, these models are all getting better. So I talked about Grok 3, which we talked about last week, but Claude have just released their new model, which is it came out last week just as we were going to air. So we didn't get a chance to think about it too much, but it's 3.7, and again, it seems to be very, very heavy on the um,
Coding.
coding, and it comes with its own coding assistant as well. So now you've got all these different coding assistants for people, but it also seems some people were dubbing it the closest thing to AGI. I'm not sure if that's fully true.
Really, I've
Yeah.
mixed, because I'm hearing people saying that they were sick of it and they went back to 3.5. And
Why? What was their problem with it?
so the issue with the coding at the moment is what I'm hearing is that when the code if the AI breaks the code, rather than fixing code cleanly in an optimal way, it will generate new code and it can kind of bloat. So you have
Mm,
so if you then aren't familiar with coding, it's really then hard to cut it, Carl, lean it
yeah,
down. I think that's one of the problems.
yeah.
Am I right in saying that this hasn't got access to the internet, this Claude
Yeah,
3.7?
this is the thing that drives me mad with Claude. It's like why they haven't introduced web browsing like all the others have. I have no idea, but it does really limit it, because there's so much you do now, especially in project delivery, right, where you need it to be reciting and referencing real-time data.
Yeah.
So I use it more. I think I find Claude more of a um, creative thing that it can produce really beautiful text, and then for coders it seems to, at least for some people, be the number one. I think it's beating most of them on benchmarks anyway, but this goes to show, doesn't it, Yoshi, the benchmarks mean nothing, because sometimes that can be top on benchmarks, and then you get all these kind of real world scenarios where people are saying it's not working like it should do.
Yeah, because you have people using it in their own industries in very different ways, right? So the use cases are slightly different. Um, as well with Claude 3.7, this is the hybrid model, right? So this is the one which can choose between speed and reasoning to some extent. So it's got that customization to it. So that's useful for users to know as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Anthropic, I don't know if they knocked it out of the park. I think 3.7 has still got time to tell around people using it. I've not really played it, but I've actually never used Claude extensively. I've only used it a few times. And I guess I've just been a sucker for ChatGPT. And actually,
Yeah.
because is what I know.
I do find that, Claude, if you're looking for something,
Got-
again, this goes back to the using the models in conjunction. So if you've created something with ChatGPT, but you want it to sound a little bit more authentic, you can then take that output and put it into Claude and turn it, because Claude's got this really cool feature which is called styles, which I don't think any of the others have, where
Mhm.
you can actually train it in a certain style. So for instance, if you want to write like, whatever author there is out there, say Stephen King, you can go and you can get a snippet of Stephen King's writing, put it in, and it will train in that style. And then every time it answers, if you choose the Stephen King style, it will write in Stephen King style.
Oh, so it's got that sort of
Yeah,
feature. I
that
don't.
is, I find that awesome.
Yeah, I guess because especially if you yourself write in different ways. Let's say we write for Flux, we write for something else, we write things personally. You might want to write in different ways, so it's useful for that. And you
Yeah,
mentioned vibe coding, right? And I'm hearing the word vibe a lot now in the AI, in the realm of AI.
yeah,
And James, it's a bit like what you do with music. It's just
yeah.
jamming. Why don't you just jamming with code? You're jamming with the music.
Yeah, and you've got the ability to do that now because you can do it without spending too long. You can, it's the fading fast mentality. Now, when you're writing anything before, without artificial intelligence, you've got to make a real kind of commitment to do it because you're investing time and energy in doing it. And then if it fails, it's, well, first of all, it's a real sucker, isn't it? Because our most valuable currency is actually time. Now there's no reason not to try it. Let's just try it, and if it doesn't work, you haven't really lost anything, and probably you've gained something from the knowledge that you've uh, sort of got through that process. So the ability to fail fast
But it's a bit like
is
psychological
amazing.
research as well. That I think there's research recently which came out saying that if you give someone something to do, when you tell them it's a task, they're likely to not enjoy it and perform worse than if you told them if they're doing it for fun.
Yeah,
I guess
yeah,
that's what vibe
exactly.
coding technically is. It's just seamless. There's no pressure. The pressure's off.
Anyone on the live stream, if you've got any views or any comments, put them in the chat and we'll bring them in. I mean, this is the first time we've done a live stream, so we haven't massively advertised it. But going forward, hopefully, we'll get a lot of comments. So anyone is listening or watching, just say a hi and who you are. It'd be really great to know who you are. But yeah, so some good stuff going on there. Let's talk about the next story then, because last week we talked about Figure. So we're going on to robotics now, right?
Mhm.
So last week we talked about Figure's new uh, robot and the one that's able to really kind of perform human-like tasks. We saw the example of two robots working together to put the dishes away, and this is where the exponential stuff starts happening because now we've got Unitree have released one. They called it a kung fu robot,
Yeah.
but the reason why, I mean, it's basically showing sort of kung fu martial arts moves. The reason that's important is because it shows the precision that these robots are now able to move in, because doing martial arts obviously isn't straightforward. So we've got this. There's an arms race on the robotics, on the humanoid robotics front. The other one about this is, I believe this is the one going to be available to buy, and I think it's from $16,000.
Yeah,
So
this is Unity. Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, that sounds like a lot of money, but think how much does an average car cost, right? And what's going to be more useful, right? Cars obviously very useful, but it's a single purpose kind of consumable, right?
I guess you could
Whereas a
elevate.
robot in theory can do so many things for you. So I think we joked about it last week where I said it won't be long until these robots are available for consumers to buy, and this goes to show just how fast it's moving. Literally the week after somebody announces that
Well, the
there's going to be one
trajectory they're
available to
saying
buy.
is like, was it 2 or 3 years, right? Or between 1 and 3 years, you should start to see robots in your home. I mean, with what you can, I know a lot of these things are demos though, but if they can generalize and learn on the cuff, without having to be trained extensively in the forefront, then I think that will definitely work. Because there was another model that came out recently, and the robot was hoovering. So I've seen about 3 or 4 of these different types of robot videos in about 2 weeks. So there's
Yeah.
obviously a movement. There's a movement in the space, and we kind of touched on this, right? Because we said that when it comes to the point where robots can learn from perception as opposed to just being completely goal directed, is when things will start to take off. So just with that hindsight approach that that figure had, right? Even when things go wrong, you just reframe it as success and you reframe it as learning. I think that's going to be the key.
Yeah.
It's like a recipe, right? It's like if you can continue to scale AI, compute and inference, and if you can continue to build robots with embodied cognition, and then just multiply that with quantum mechanics. I know we're not going to cover this in the newsletter, but Amazon just also released something following Microsoft and Google on quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
This triadic force multiplier, I guess, will I think is what will take us to AGI if you can connect
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I think that at some point robotics will have its chat GPT moment where it just becomes so obvious to that people will start buying it. And I think this might be getting close to it because $16,000, there'll be a lot of people who will say, okay, now it's probably worth
But then there's
investing
the
in something
question.
else.
But here's the question. The question is,
Mm.
what does that mean for ethics? Because right now, everything, all of the AI safety alignment and the ethics conversation is focused on the AI which is operating within your laptops, your phones, your system, your digital, your devices.
Yeah.
So when you then put these things out into the real world, that
Like the
becomes,
physical AI.
yeah, it
Yeah.
becomes physical AI. It becomes uh, huge, right?
Well, I don't see, people separate it, but I don't really see a difference between any of them because you've got, as you say, you've got the AI that lives in our devices, and then you've got the physical AI that lives in a robot because it's able to move. You've got the AI that's going to live in a car because
Mm,
all a car, these Teslas, the robo taxis, all they are is effectively robots on wheels.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same thing. So we are going to live in a world of robots powered by AI. So you
But
can't separate the two.
no, but it exists on a spectrum from being narrow to generalized, right? I think that's the
Yeah,
problem. If these things can work beyond what they know, so transfer learning to some extent, or just generalizing to things they haven't seen before, and then if you couple that with a level of autonomy, agency, or the ability to think, it becomes a lot less predictable. And I think
yeah,
that's the concern.
yeah. No, there's a long way to run on this, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's loads more news on that in the newsletter. I've put the links for anyone listening in to subscribe to the newsletter where you can watch videos and you can go into what we call the rabbit hole to find out more about these stories. So that really covers the main stories this week. The only other thing to bring listeners' attention to is, Yoshi, you've written a really brilliant blog on why reasoning models should be used in projects. So we won't go into that in too much detail now, but is there any kind of very quick point you want to raise?
A quick point is a follow on from GPT 4.5. It marks the evolution to reasoning models. And because in product delivery, we plan a lot and we have to have things right, and there's a lot of risk associated when things don't go right. Two things you want are models which can reason effectively. And if they reason effectively, there is traceability so you can see what they're doing. And you can see why they've come with that approach. And I think that's
Mm.
a key thing. So it's a question of the destination or the journey, and ideally you want both. And
Yeah,
this blog kind of talks to that and says, okay, if you're in project delivery, when should you be using a reasoning model? When is it better using that than using something that people are familiar with, like for Omni?
yeah, absolutely. So hang on, I've got so I think that's probably it for this week, isn't it? We also talk about some podcasts that are out there, including our own, and then we do give some advice around, and maybe we can cover this in a bit more detail about how you can use AI to create your own board. This goes back to the episode that we had with Jeff Woods a few weeks ago. So we've gone through a step-by-step guide about how you can actually um, gather all the data about your board, or it doesn't have to be a board, a client or meeting, so that you can train it and then converse with it before the actual meetings to get ahead of yourself. So that's all in the newsletter. So I think that's probably it for this week. As we said, we'll be back on Friday with a podcast. We haven't yet actually decided who's going to go up on Friday, so it's going to be a bit of a secret, and you'll find out on Friday. But anything else you wanted to raise, Yoshi?
No, I mean, I'm looking forward to next week, see what comes out. Maybe another robot.
Yeah. Well, what is the big news we're waiting for next week? Is there anything on the horizon? Well, you never know.
GPT-5.
There's always new models released.
I
But
think it'll be the conversation around GPT-5, right? And
yeah,
also maybe Amazon, because there was the whole Alexa thing recently as
there
well.
was. Yeah, there's the Alexa Plus, which I saw. Again, the video for that is in the is in the newsletter. But yeah, I'm sure we can launch into one of those in a bit more detail. But that's great. So everyone listening in, thank you for tuning into our first ever live show. This was really a bit of a test. You know, from next week, we're going to advertise it in advance. So we'll hopefully get a lot more people on. But we just want to see how the technology works. So thank you all so much for listening. And for those on the podcast who will be getting this on the Wednesday morning, thank you. From next week on a Monday at about 7:15, there'll be a live stream of this as well. So until then, we'll say goodbye. Bye-bye. Okay.